Bart A. Halderson and Krista Ray had been building a life together since the early 90s, when they met at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which they both attended after finishing high school. At that university, these two people studied degrees from which they graduated in the early years of the 90s before getting married on July 30th, 1994. By that time, Bart was 23 years old and Krista was 26. Already graduated and married, the couple decided to make their life in the city where they had met. So after getting a job, they bought a house in Windsor, which is a census-designated area in the state of Wisconsin. And just a couple of years after getting married, the couple started their family. The first to be born was their son, Mitchell, in the year 1997, and then came Chandler in the year 98. In the following years, the Halderson family continued building a new life that was undoubtedly good. Their marriage was stable. Bart and Krista continued to share the same affection as in the beginning. And in addition to that, they had an excellent relationship with their children whom they adored and supported. In addition to their children, they had two dogs, Izzy and Rizzo, who were two more members of the family, known to their neighbors and friends for their kindness, as well as their active role in organizations like the Boy Scouts of America, among others. The childhood and adolescence of their children passed in the most common way possible, so there is not much more to say about that time. After graduating from high school, the eldest of the brothers, Mitchell, grew up to become a technology specialist, and at 24 years old, he was engaged to Caitlin Negetlo, with whom he had been living for a couple of years. For his part, when the events occurred in July of 2021, Chandler was 23 years old and still lived with his parents. He had just graduated from the same university where his parents had graduated with a degree in renewable energy engineering. In addition to studying until then, he had a part-time job at an insurance company. This was also remote. It wasn't a job with a very big salary, but it was a job that allowed him to have some money for his own things and to indulge himself a bit. Like going out with his girlfriend Catherine Melander, a 21-year-old girl with whom he had been dating for 2 years by then and who was also a regular visitor at the Haldersons' house, who had welcomed her with open arms as one of their own. Bart and Krista then, at 50 and 53 years old respectively, couldn't be happier with the life they were leading, but they did manage to become even prouder. Shortly after their youngest son graduated, he informed them that SpaceX, the company of billionaire Elon Musk that launches rockets and satellites into space, had offered him a job in Florida. A unique opportunity that Chandler was not going to waste. In fact, when he told his parents, he claimed to have already rented a car in Florida and an apartment to which he would move with his girlfriend Catherine, who, like the boy's parents, was filled with pride and excitement to do this. However, it would never take place due to an accident. In June of that year, when there were only a few weeks left to move, in a somewhat confusing situation, Chandler fell down the stairs of his house while alone, so he had to drive himself to the nearest hospital to be checked in the emergency room. His concern was because he had hit his head quite hard and wanted to make sure that, while in the ER, he underwent several tests like tomographies to determine the severity of his fall, which didn't injure him. Thanks to those tests, it was determined that Chandler had a severe head contusion due to the blow. This contusion was so significant that the medical team even mentioned to him that he might need surgery to prevent any nerve damage. He was finally discharged with strict recovery instructions, such as the need to wear an orthopedic collar and to rest almost completely. He couldn't move from the bed. When Chandler explained that he had a trip to make in a matter of days, the doctors forbade him from flying, arguing that it was extremely dangerous to do so. The dream of moving to Florida and working at SpaceX seemed to be fading away, as the company was not willing to wait for him while he recovered. Of course, the boy's spirits dropped considerably. He had lost a unique opportunity that was not going to repeat itself, but both his parents and his girlfriend stayed by his side, accompanying him and helping him in this recovery. Up to that point, we could say that Chandler was suffering from a bit of bad luck, as the stair incident was the last straw that broke the camel's back. He used to have certain issues with procedures, and there is a long list of things that happened to him. When Chandler graduated, he didn't receive any papers, no proof, let alone a diploma from the university. This worried his father a lot, as he didn't understand how he was going to manage his career and future jobs if he couldn't conclusively prove that he had graduated from university. Although his son wasn't as worried since he had been having similar problems for quite some time. This leads us to the university procedures and the problems his family had been having with the administration. Chandler's parents were having difficulties resolving issues regarding the paperwork their son required. All the doubts they had usually ended up in an email that referred them to other departments where nothing was resolved. After long discussions, Chandler managed to get the university to send the missing documentation, although he still hadn't received it. Still, they would eventually go to the university to settle it all. He had apparently scheduled the appointment and planned to go with his father. Chandler had several different jobs according to what he told his close ones. Among them, he did police diving and was a worker at an insurance company. For those not familiar with police diving, to put it simply, let's say they are divers who work with the police on those complicated searches within bodies of water. It should be clarified that for this one needs to be a professional diver. I'm telling you this so you have an idea of where we're going. In her last job at the insurance company, the problem she had was that she gave her bank account number incorrectly, making it impossible for them to deliver her first paycheck. Once that issue was clarified, which took weeks, it turned out they had incorrectly recorded her as a part-time worker, so the payment they had to give her was not correct. Finally, the sum they had to give her after all that time, all those lost weeks, was too large. So the bank thought it was a fraudulent transfer and blocked the payment. So after all this, that thing about the ladder made it seem cursed. This problem after the fall made it so he couldn't even stand for too long, something he obviously let everyone know, and thus it was a great misfortune. However, that dramatic episode in the life of the Haldersons could hardly compare to what would happen the following month, which surprised everyone who knew the family. The first to notice Krista's absence were her co-workers, when on Friday, July 2nd, the woman did not show up to work and she was absent without providing any notice or reason. For Daniel Kroninger, a co-worker of Krista's for years, but also a personal friend of hers, this caught his attention. It was not something Krista usually did. It was not in her character, quite the opposite. She took her job very seriously and her work ethic was excellent, so an unannounced absence was not something she would even consider doing. Somewhat confused and worried, Daniel decided to write to her, and in the absence of a response to his messages, he tried to call her, but he also had no success. So, when his shift ended, even more worried, he decided to go to the Haldersons' house to make sure everything was okay, but the visit did not reassure him. When he arrived in the car with his girlfriend, he noticed that the house seemed completely normal, so he exited the vehicle and rang the doorbell several times, but no one answered. Daniel allowed himself to look through one of the windows that overlooked the living room and discovered that behind the door, as if blocking it, there was something which he found very strange, so he decided to also look through the garage window. Inside this place were the couple's 2 cars, as if they were at home. However, the house was silent, dark, and no one responded. The door was also locked. While Daniel and his girlfriend were checking the perimeter of the house, trying to find something to assure them that Krista and her husband were okay, Chandler came out of the house with a towel around his waist, explaining that he had just come out of the shower. When Krista's co-worker arrived at the Haldersons' house, he was attended to by Chandler with a bad and bloody foot. He had been playing with the dogs inside the house until they broke a glass coffee table, causing him to cut himself among all that mess, resulting in this particular wound. When asked about his parents, he explained that they had gone north, where Krista's family cabin was, to spend the 4th of July there. According to Chandler, his mother had not been able to respond to multiple attempts to communicate, as the area they were going to didn't have much phone signal. However, he promised them that he had spoken with his parents in the areas of the journey where there was signal and that he would be in touch with them, that there was no need to worry. Daniel decided to leave the house even though he wasn't very convinced, especially because in the following days he didn't receive any kind of message or news from Krista, so he decided to keep in touch with Chandler to see if he knew anything new about his parents, but he simply didn't communicate anything new. So, on Sunday, July 4th, Chandler called Daniel to tell him that he was bored and needed something to do, so his mother's friend decided to invite him to watch the typical Independence Day fireworks with them. And obviously, during the time they spent together, he asked him again about his parents, and Chandler responded quite generically that yes, he had spoken with them, and they told him they'd return Monday. But, as you can imagine, Krista did not return to work on Monday, nor on Tuesday. She did not communicate, did not send messages, not a call, nothing. Which deeply worried Daniel again. Krista had told him that she had a medical appointment on Tuesday the 6th that she had been waiting for a long time, so it made no sense for her to decide to miss something she was looking forward to. Therefore, when Wednesday the 7th came and there was still no news from the couple, Dan was sure that something bad or at least strange was happening with his friend. So that same morning, he got back in touch with Chandler to basically order him to go report his parents' disappearance and fill out a missing person report. And so he did, although he didn't even go to the police station to do it in person, but simply called and asked to speak with the Dane County Sheriff's Office. According to his report, his parents had left home on Friday, July 2nd, heading to Krista's cabin in northern Wisconsin, a couple of hours from where they lived. Their plan was to meet up with another couple, whom Chandler didn't know, and spend the 4th of July together, but they never came back home. When asked for more details, Chandler recalled that he hadn't seen his parents on Friday, as they had left before 7 in the morning, which was when he woke up. Both of his parents' cars were still at the house, so he assumed that their friends had picked them up in their own car to go together, but he couldn't be sure. With the report filed, the investigation began as a search for 2 missing persons. So the detectives decided first and foremost to search the Haldersons' house for evidence that corroborated what the couple's youngest son had told them, in addition to contacting different people with whom the couple might be. That's how they discovered that Chandler had not informed his older brother about their parents' disappearance at any point. In other words, Mitchell had no idea what was going on, and in a much more logical reaction than his brother, the first thing he did was drive from his house to the family cabin trying to find out if his parents had been there, but he found no sign that there had been people at the place in the last few days. Everything was turned off, tidy, and there didn't seem to be any vehicle tracks indicating that someone had driven to the place before them. Chandler told the detectives that on the 4th of July he had received a message from his mother saying that they had arrived safely at the cabin. The message continued saying that she didn't have much signal to communicate and that the place was crowded. She informed him that they would go to White Lake later that same day for a festival, that they would then stay for the 4th of July festivities, and that they would return on Monday night or Tuesday morning. There weren't many clues in that text from how it was written. Nothing strange could be highlighted except for the fact that they did not respond to any other type of communication and that they had gone on vacation so suddenly. But it was also hard to understand why Chandler didn't report this message to his brother. It was a 3-hour journey to the cabin. He didn't report the disappearance until July 7th, but in all that time he could have easily driven to the place to check the situation himself. However, he didn't seem to be affected in the slightest by the lack of answers. In the police report, Chandler claimed that the reason they left was to repair a water pump and a campfire that was damaged after the last storm. But when it came time to speak with the media to tell the story, he mentioned that his parents must be out of reception at some city casino, which was very hard to believe for several reasons. But 2 in particular. First of all, primarily Chandler's parents didn't like casinos. They weren't those kind of people. They didn't like those kind of places. They never went, so it was very strange that they suddenly left without notice and were at a casino. Why would he say that of all things? He could have said a lot of things, but he said a casino and also excused it by saying that inside those places there probably wasn't any signal, so that's why they weren't answering the messages. But the other reason is that the mother had a very important appointment with the doctor that Monday. And I really mean very important. She had been waiting for it for too long and she was very anxious to know what the doctor would tell her. So was she going to suddenly go to a casino? Not to mention they also lost 3 days of work, and Chandler kept insisting to his mother's colleague to ask for more days off for her. What Mitchell found. Chandler all that time was acting like a quite inconsiderate person, especially with his brother, who of course also didn't think this was normal, that their parents would so lightly go on vacation and to a casino. So when he arrived at the cabin, what he found was an empty place. He was worried. He went all the way there, thought that maybe along the way he would find some clue that the cabin would be occupied, but no, quite the opposite. The grass was grown. There was no sign that anyone had been there. So it can be assumed that they didn't even arrive, that something must have happened to them on the way. However, Chandler showed this message to them, which essentially explained that they had already been at the place for several days. So how could it be? The person who knew what really happened had to have Chandler Halderson's cell phone. The fact that he had never notified his brother made Chandler's detectives suspicious. There was something odd about him, but they couldn't explain what. So they decided to start watching his movements more closely. However, it wasn't necessary because the day after the missing person report, that is, on July 8th, the sheriff's office received a call from the Melender family, the family of Chandler's girlfriend, Catherine. Kat's relatives had a farm in Cottage Grove, a town about 15 minutes from Chandler's house. So knowing that he was alone on the 4th of July, they decided to invite him and went to pick him up, spending almost until night with him at the farm. The next day, on July 5th, Chandler went back to the farm, this time without Kat, and in his own car, explaining that he wanted to use the indoor pool at the house, something they didn't object to. Still, a pretty strange request, especially going without his girlfriend, but they couldn't say no. After a while, without hearing from him, they went to look for him, finding that he wasn't in the pool, but had moved with his car, had moved away from the area where he was previously, and had gone to a place a few kilometers further, right where there were several bushes, as if he was hiding something. It's worth noting that it wasn't a place that Chandler was familiar with before. The first time he had gone was precisely the day before, which was quite strange. Of course, with this information, the detectives in charge of the investigation decided to go directly to the farm and the area where they had seen Chandler acting suspiciously. And they didn't have to look long before they discovered what he had been doing there. In a kind of elevation of the ground hidden among the bushes, they found the torso of an adult man, and not far from it they found a black bag turned over as if its contents had been emptied in the area. And the investigation continued when the forensic team arrived at the scene and continued to comb the area. There they found a metal drum that was broken on one side, and inside it appeared to be the tools that had been used to dismember the found torso. There was a pair of scissors, a handsaw, and a long saw blade. All the items had dry red stains as if it were blood. On July 9th, Chandler was immediately arrested on the charge of giving the police false information about a missing person. This was a way to buy time and not let him go while the Wisconsin lab and the morgue analyzed what they had found. After a few days, it was confirmed that what was staining the tools was indeed blood, and even more importantly, the torso found belonged to Bart Halderson, who had died from 2 gunshot wounds to the abdomen, which had been inflicted from behind. On July 12th, 10 days after the disappearance of Bart and Krista, their younger son was officially charged with first-degree murder, in addition to mutilating a corpse and hiding it. And there were Krista's remains, which at that time led to the belief that she could still be alive and be an accomplice to her son. But all of this would be resolved thanks to some witnesses and the evidence from Kat, Chandler's girlfriend. Chandler had deceived Kat before, so she didn't trust him too much. That's why she asked him to use Snapchat, as the app has a tracking option on the map so she could see his location and check if he was with other women. And there's a very interesting detail here. Also particular is that apparently the application does not detect all the time where you are, or it doesn't have those permissions, but at least at that moment it updated the location every time the person opened it. Saturday, 3 in the morning, 9 a.m. Kat saw on the map that he was near the river, in a place that she knew very well. And in fact, she had previously taken him there to swim. It actually seemed strange to her because Chandler had told her that he couldn't accompany her that day because he had things to do at home, which was strange in itself because he never did the housework. He didn't consider it his responsibility, claiming he was always busy. So, him suddenly being in this place meant that he had lied to her. Although, of course, she never imagined it was because he had killed his parents and was hiding his mother's body at that moment. Apart from what I told you before, the Snapchat map would update every time the person opened the app. So while he was doing all that, he unlocked his phone and started looking at Snapchat. So when Kat told the police all this and showed them the screenshot of the app, their perspective completely changed. That screenshot would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the trial. It was only 2 days later that they were able to find remains of Krista in the same area, specifically her legs, in addition to other remains belonging to both of them. The next step was to examine the Haldersons' house. Inside, they found a scene worthy of a horror movie. There were bloodstains in various places in the house, but what was worse, in the basement there were containers with blood inside. And if that doesn't seem creepy to you, they also found even more things. Inside the fireplace, they found remains of human skulls and other bones that it seemed obvious he had tried to burn. Chandler's guilt was clear. It was obvious in this instance that Chandler had something to do with it. He tried at one point to blame his older brother, but it was no use because there was too much evidence against him. The only problem is that there was no apparent motive, a reason why Chandler would commit his horrible crimes. To find a motive, they just had to analyze his life a little more closely. Chandler's environment had no reason to distrust him, but the truth is that practically nothing in his life was true. Chandler had never graduated from college. In fact, he had dropped out in the first semester, but that was not the only lie. He didn't even work for an insurance company. In fact, this was an excuse to be able to stay all day at home locked in his room playing video games. As you can probably imagine, if he hadn't graduated from college and had been able to lie about his job, he also lied about being contacted by SpaceX, who had no idea who Chandler Halderson was. Many sources claim that the only real thing was his fall down the stairs at his home, an accident that actually came in quite handy to end the SpaceX lie, although for that he had to exaggerate its severity, of course. For other sources, not even the fall was real. For many, it was another lie that Chandler created, a kind of snowball that he could no longer control. After all, the date to go to Florida was approaching, and he had no more excuses. However, his parents had suspected long before the fall. Chandler was working a lot for the insurance company, more than usual, but he never had money. When his parents asked him about this, he made up something else. He told his parents that the company had a problem with the payment software, and to make them believe him, he even showed them emails from the company as evidence. Emails that he had created himself. He did something similar with the university. When his parents started asking why he still didn't have his diploma, he showed them emails he had been exchanging with 2 administrative employees, Elisa Brandt and Daniel Spaeth. The 2 people and the emails from his job were non-existent. They were Chandler's inventions to avoid discovery. This lie went so far that he even bought disposable phones to add to his emails, and even answered several calls from these asking for his diploma. Angry at the fact that the university was still putting obstacles in his son's way to give him his diploma, on June 29th, Bart decided to call the admissions department himself, pretending to be his son. Outraged by the lack of responses, the conversation started off quite violent until the administrator confirmed that neither Elisa Brandt nor Daniel Spade worked there. But what's worse, Chandler had not only not graduated, but he also owed at least $2,000 to the university. On top of that, later they located the doctor who gave Chandler the orthopedic collar for the fall he supposedly suffered. And it turns out that he actually did it only because of the man's insistence, since whatever he had or perhaps had done to himself by supposedly falling down the stairs did not pose any problem for traveling, walking, or living life normally. Nothing had happened to him. In summary, Chandler stayed at home all day and they never found him. One would wonder how he managed to deceive everyone for so long, but it's also important to understand that Mitchell had recently been diagnosed with diabetes, so the family was more focused on that, on helping him, and Krista possibly had skin cancer. That's what the appointment she had been waiting for so long was for. If they didn't see Chandler as a liar, then they had no reason to be on guard and expect some kind of lie to uncover, or maybe they also didn't see it as serious. His lies had begun to come to light and for the prosecution, the idea of being discovered made this man panic and decide to end his parents. Chandler was sent to trial with charges of first-degree murder, giving false information in a missing person case, mutilating a body, hiding a body, and all of that times 2 since he did it to both his father and mother. The big question is what he was going to do. If he went to Florida, he couldn't leave. He had lied to his girlfriend, his parents, everyone. They were going to arrive. They weren't going to have an apartment. They weren't going to have a car. Chandler's trial started in January 2022. The prosecution asserted that the motive for the crimes had to do with his parents discovering the lie. It was at the trial that Katz was asked about a purchase of 9 kilos of ice that Chandler made, clearly for his parents' bodies, and she, when questioned about this, said she knew nothing. But what happens? The prosecution had some doubts about whether she was an accomplice, and it didn't help that she took so long to answer. She took quite a while to think about the answer as to whether she knew anything about the ice bags until she finally answered saying she knew nothing. But there are 2 things to keep in mind in case they find her a bit suspicious. The first is the most obvious, and that is she is under the scrutiny of the entire court and the public. She probably took her time to understand and remember about the ice and any similar issue, just that. But the second thing is that she was a very cautious person and used to note down everything she thought was important on her phone at that time, probably because she didn't trust her own memory, so faced with such a specific detail, she had to think more deeply. We can't even be sure that she was going to find out about that purchase because the biggest favor Chandler asked her while hiding what he did was to bring him peroxide. This with the excuse that he had cut himself, but peroxide also lights up with luminol. It's a perfect excuse for Chandler and a very small favor to ask of his girlfriend. I really think that Chandler thought all of this wasn't gonna get out of hand and that they were gonna think he had nothing to do with it. Maybe because he constantly lied and thought he was a very good liar, or because he thought he had done a very good job of covering his tracks. Either way, he was cooperative until the moment he was cornered. Some believe he was a sadistic criminal, while others think he was just too dumb for his own good. On Friday the 2nd, the same day his parents disappeared, Chandler killed them and proceeded to invite his girlfriend Kat over to spend the night, taking advantage of his parents not being there. He must have believed that there was no trace left of what he had done. Well, yes, Kat didn't even notice. But there were traces of blood in the trash bins, which is presumed to have been an element used to transport the bodies. There was also blood in the fireplace. So, to sum up, did he kill them in the living room after a heated argument? According to the evidence that could be collected from the crime scene, so there was blood in the fireplace, blood in the trash cans, but there was no blood in Chandler's car. Now, this made many people doubt about how he managed to transport the bodies. However, this could be avoided by wrapping them in tarp or some carpet he had in the house. It's been observed in multiple cases and is not as challenging as it appears. And then cleaning anything with the peroxide he used as an excuse for the wound he got on his foot. As I told you, the peroxide interferes with the luminol. And while Kat was at the house that night, Chandler's parents were probably there. In the freezer? The evidence against Chandler was overwhelming, so after a couple of weeks, the jury found him guilty of all charges and the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. So he will spend the rest of his days in jail. What strikes me most about these types of cases, which are not new, there are several people who have basically done the same thing, is what are they thinking? To what extent do they believe they can deceive people? One lie? Well, you can resolve that. But all of this, I don't understand what he thought was going to happen. And if they weren't his parents, if he ever went to Florida anyway, somehow he was going to end up killing the girlfriend. So well, tell me what you think below in the comments. I'm reading them. Remember, you can send me emails. It's better if you send me emails because it's easier for me to save the cases you recommend through there. My email is below in the description of all the videos, so you can look for it in that place. I have nothing else to tell you. So here are the Patreons and the channel members. Thank you for supporting me through those means. And with nothing else to say, here's a new video, here's a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face, and I'll see you in another video. Goodbye, goodbye.